I actually don't think, I think I've only seen this level of excitement in the crypto space twice before. So once was the very, very earliest days of Bitcoin, when also was excruciating to try and use Bitcoin, but it was kind of the best time to get in. And then also the very, very early days of Ethereum, when I remember, you know, Vitalik was going from town to town in these meetups, and just the level of excitement in the rooms was crazy for something that hadn't even launched. And so I'm extremely optimistic about Sovryn, because I've seen this happen twice before. Just the level of energy, it's crazy.
Hey, welcome back everybody to Altcoin Daily. My name's Austin, here with Aaron, and very excited to speak to special guest today, Yago, who is an early contributor to Sovryn, which is bringing DeFi to Bitcoin. Yago, how's it going?
Hey guys, absolutely a pleasure to be with you guys. Looking forward to it.
For sure. And I'm excited, number one, because we've seen all this DeFi grow on the Ethereum ecosystem and on other, Cardano, Solana, all that money flow into those ecosystems. And you guys are spearheading the charge for building this DeFi infrastructure on Bitcoin. So I want to get to that, but first, just big picture, what's your background and how'd you get involved with crypto?
Yeah, so my background, sort of from an academic and business perspective, is I was a neuroscientist. I worked on neural networks, and I read the Satoshi white paper in 2011 because I was reading stuff in network science. So I came across it by mistake, and it blew my mind. So part of my background is I grew up in South Africa, which was, apartheid South Africa at the time. Part of my family were associated with Nelson Mandela's ANC party and had been designated as terrorists. And so they had been forced to flee the country. When I was a young kid, I was smuggling gold out to them in Kruger rands that my mother would sew into my clothing. So Kruger rands are like these little gold coins. And my family had, survived the Holocaust by smuggling jewels. So for me, this idea that financial sovereignty was very important. Having the ability to have true ownership of something was critical to being able to preserve your freedoms and your sovereignty. Was something I had grown up with, and I had seen in many different examples in my life how when governments try to control you or become oppressive, the first thing they go after is the money. They go after your money because that's the best and easiest way for them to control a population. So when I came across Bitcoin, I think I was already primed to sort of see the value there. And so in 2011, I started getting into Bitcoin, and very, very quickly, I became all Bitcoin all the time. And I've been trying to build up the adoption of Bitcoin ever since.
Wow. I love that. Yeah, Bitcoin is probably, in my opinion, the best way to, take control of your money and be able to, transport it, just hold on to it. My question is, why DeFi on Bitcoin? Why DeFi on Bitcoin? I mean, isn't DeFi on Ethereum or Solana, isn't that working fine? Why DeFi on Bitcoin?
Well, there are two reasons to have DeFi on Bitcoin. The first reason is for Bitcoin, and the second reason is for DeFi. So for Bitcoin, there's $1 trillion in assets. Those are assets that people have value for, right? People hold Bitcoin because they want to have an asset that they can use without intermediaries. But today, if you want to use Bitcoin, you pretty much always have to go through an intermediary. If you want to lend, if you want to borrow, if you want to trade, if you want to have a stable coin, all of these things are sending you to a central intermediary. And you can't even use Ethereum for DeFi because, the way that Bitcoin works on Ethereum is through a centralized party, right? So WBTC is just Bitco account, right? So you have to trust them. So for Bitcoin, there's a huge sort of latent demand out there. In fact, I would say the biggest market by far for DeFi is Bitcoin. And until Sovryn came around, no one was really tapping that market. And then from the DeFi side, well, I actually don't think you can build really good DeFi outside of Bitcoin. And the reason is simple. Bitcoin is unique even after all of these years in the crypto space, Bitcoin is the only system that you know it's going to look the same way today as it's going to look tomorrow and in 10 years and for your children and your grandchildren. It's a law of nature, block after block after block, the same rule set, the same thing. That is the kind of reliability that you need if you're trying to build a new financial system, right? Because a new financial system means mortgages, it means pensions, it means long-term lending, it means people's savings, right? It needs to be ironclad reliability like a law of nature. And only Bitcoin provides that. So right now we're seeing a lot of experimentation on ETH, on Solana, on Avalanche. And I think that's really great, right? There's a lot to learn from that experimentation. But ultimately, when we rebuild the financial infrastructure of the world, that's going to be done on Bitcoin because it's the only reliable system out there.
So talk to me about Sovryn, because I've personally seen you on the Pomp podcast, on Bankless podcast, but for those people that have never heard of Sovryn, what is it and what do you provide?
So Sovryn is an extension of Bitcoin, right? It's a protocol that extends the functionality of Bitcoin. I sometimes call it the Bitcoin with superpowers, right? So with Sovryn, you're able to build out all the key components of smart contracts, decentralized finance. And so what Sovryn does is it uses all of the technologies of Bitcoin layer 2 to create these tools. So in a very short space of time, Sovryn has built out lending and trading, the margin trading, Bitcoin-backed stablecoins, a launch pad, and maybe most importantly, a very, very robust governance system that manages the protocol. And on top of that, there's a whole slew of things that are being built by people who are working on the Sovryn protocol. So Sovryn is not a company. It's not an application, it's a protocol. And it basically means that Bitcoin can now do anything that you're seeing on the other chains. And in particular, Sovryn right now is focused on building out the financial tools that extend people's sovereignty over their Bitcoin and really over any type of money to never having to use an intermediary ever again.
So with Sovryn, you can do Bitcoin-backed stablecoins, you can do lending and borrowing, you can do spot and margin trading. Is that correct?
Yeah, so you can do, all of those things. And, there's work right now being done by one team who are working to bring perpetual swaps to Sovryn. There's a team who are bringing zero interest loans. So you'll be able to borrow against your Bitcoin and pay zero interest into perpetuity. So you never have to sell your Bitcoin again. There's a project that has already launched a system for managing marriages, and they're now working on divorces. So you can, when you get married, you can do it, without a government, without an intermediary. You can just, have a global marriage, which is protected by the most secure system in the world, the most permanent system in the world, Bitcoin, right? And then if you ever get divorced, instead of having to go through years and years of a court case, you just have a smart contract that's able to manage that out. There's a team working on mortgages. There's a team working on systems with El Salvador so that people in El Salvador can start borrowing against their Bitcoin and using Bitcoin-backed stablecoins with Lightning Network as their normal means of payment. It's phenomenally exciting how much innovation is happening. And what's cool about it also is in many ways it's different from sort of like the experiments in DeFi that have been happening on other chains, because Bitcoin is so much more connected to real world economics, right? So like these things like pensions, mortgages, these things are happening on Sovryn because Bitcoin's already deeply embedded into the world of remittance, into El Salvador, into the way that Nigerians save money. So it's really exciting to see a different kind of DeFi emerging very, very quickly.
Interesting. I'd love for you to go further on that, because for the average person, they're just going to care about ease of use, I would assume, if they're not into crypto. So Bitcoin's embedded in a lot of these places around the world. Could you just speak a little bit more on why somebody might choose lending and borrowing on Sovryn as opposed to on an other protocol?
Well, I mean, so for example, with El Salvador, the reason is obvious, right? So El Salvador have chosen Bitcoin as legal tender in their country. And there's a reason they chose Bitcoin, right? They weren't going to choose Ethereum. They weren't going to choose Sol, because Ethereum is constantly changing, is actively managed by an unclear group of people, and is about to go through this massive upgrade, right? So it's a technology. It's a very cool technological platform, but as an institution, right, as a system for delivering sound money, that's really not what Ethereum has gone after. And so, large institutions, companies, when they put their treasury money, and countries, when they choose to be sovereign themselves or to enhance their own sovereignty, they choose Bitcoin. So if you want to have a decentralized financial system where the people of El Salvador can have access to, you guys could be able to lend them money, right? Or they could have access to a system which is going to allow them to get a mortgage on a house where usually they wouldn't be able to because they're unbanked. You're going to need a system which is not only connected to Bitcoin, but is also backed and based on the reliability of Bitcoin. And so I think for that reason, it's something that really only Sovryn right now is providing.
And I always like to say, Bitcoin is our best shot to truly separate money from state, just because it's the most censorship resistant, it's the most decentralized. Obviously, a critique from maybe an outsider would be it's slow, but you guys are building on a side chain, correct? Can you talk about the trade-offs or the side chain or your plan?
So Sovryn basically is like an operating system for Bitcoin layer 2. So it combines all of the different layers. So most of the smart contracts are going to be built, and currently are built, on Rootstock, which is a sidechain of Bitcoin. It's got it's kind of like if you took the technology of Ethereum and ported it to Bitcoin, and you'd get the best of both worlds. That's what Rootstock is. So Rootstock is EVM compatible. You can use, and you can even port Ethereum type contracts. It's got 30-second block speeds. You can do rollups. You can do zero-knowledge proofs. So that's Rootstock. And then also on the transaction side, we're integrating Lightning Network, right? So you can use that for payments, and that's basically got infinite scale. So people say that Bitcoin isn't scalable or that it's slow, but I think, again, that's looking at it through the wrong frame of reference. That's looking at it through the reference of as if the layer 1 was the technology, and as if the technology was what was important. So technology is always built out in layers. And Bitcoin is actually probably the most scalable blockchain, because what it's done is it said we're going to be very, very precise in the layers that we build, right? So the Bitcoin layer 1, the Bitcoin main chain, is very, very good at just acting as a settlement layer. It's the best settlement layer because it's so reliable. Lightning is really, really good because it's got infinite scale. Rootstock is really, really good because it's secured by Bitcoin proof of work, but can do smart contracts. I think that's the way that you build technology, which is scalable. And Bitcoin is also extremely scalable in another way, which most people don't seem to talk about, but I think is really important. Bitcoin scalability is not about technology, it's about sovereignty, right? So Bitcoin is scalable sovereignty. Individuals get Bitcoin because they want to be sovereign. They want to have control over their own destiny and their finances. Companies get Bitcoin because they want to be sovereign. They want to have control over their treasury and their financial future, right? So if you think about Michael Saylor, that's what he keeps saying. If you think about why Tesla bought Bitcoin, it's exactly for that reason. And now countries are buying Bitcoin for exactly the same reason, right? It's so that they are less reliant on the dollar, less reliant on the US, can less be pressured by the World Bank. So that's a phenomenal thing, right? There's this tool that provides sovereignty from the level of the individual all the way up to nation states. That's scalability.
I love that. Everybody in the audience, I'm curious to know what you're thinking. I think if you appreciate this kind of interview, hit the like button because Iago is certainly providing some great alpha here. This might go without saying, but with Sovryn, you keep control of your keys?
Yes. So you can't have DeFi if you're not controlling your keys, right? So Sovryn, you never need to register your name or anything. It's not like an exchange. Well, it feels like an exchange, right? So I think, the devs who are working on the reference implementation, the front end. So if you go to sovryn.com, .app, Sovryn.app, you can see the front end, and you can click into the app, and you can connect your wallet. And it's not perfect. The system's only been out for about 5 months, and there's constant iteration. But you'll see how much stuff is being built, and that's all being built by different teams and by the core team. And you'll probably have an experience which is more similar to a centralized exchange than maybe any other DeFi system. And that's on purpose, because Sovryn is not really competing with DeFi on Ethereum or Solana. Sovryn is competing with centralized finance as a concept, in just the same way that Bitcoin is competing with centralized money as a concept. And so the idea is to try and make this we're not quite there yet, but to make this as approachable for ordinary people as a centralized service. And in many ways, it's better than a centralized service, even for the average user, because you don't have to register, you don't have KYC, you just click and you're in, and you don't give up your funds. You basically have the funds in your wallet, and you spend them or use them or transact with them as you want. So I think it's ultimately going to be the most frictionless experience that users can have.
I like that. I'm really excited to check it out. And we will be leaving all links in the description, so everybody can just click through down in the description. Well, you'll know it's the real link. I'm curious to hear about the actual SOV token, the Sovryn token, which has a fluctuating value. What is the use case for the SOV token?
So you never need to use SOV to use the Sovryn platform, right? The protocol is permissionless. Anyone can use it at any time. And the base asset is Bitcoin, but you can have stable coins, you can have ETH, there's BNB even on the system. So why is there another token? And the reason there's another token is because when you are building a decentralized system, what you're really building is a rule set, right? You're building the rules of the road for the people who are going to be using the system. Now, Bitcoin has taken, like Bitcoin main chain, has taken the approach of you're building a rule set that everyone in the world needs to be able to use. And so, and not only that, it needs to be money. It needs to be like the most reliable thing in the world, like gold, right? So gold doesn't change. And so Bitcoin doesn't change. And so you have this very, very simple rule set. Now, on top of gold, hundreds of years ago, people started building the financial system, right? The financial system has more rules, has more things that it needs to be able to do. And so Sovryn, which is building its financial system, needs to have more rules. And those need to be able to change more frequently. So there needs to be a way of coming to consensus around how those rules are going to work. And maybe I'll take a step back here for a second and say something about sort of, I think maybe the biggest thing I think people are missing in the crypto space, right? So I think most people have been looking at the crypto space through the lens of technology, right? We've been trained over 20 years of tech investing, right? That you invest in tech networks like Twitter or Facebook, and you make a lot of money. And so that's the lens that people look at Bitcoin and crypto is sort of like a continuation of the internet. But the systems that we're building are not tech products. They're social institutions. Money is a social institution. Finance is a social institution. These are not technologies. These are rule sets. And I'll go a step further. The key innovation in Bitcoin and in the entire crypto space is actually really, really simple. People say it's all kinds of things. Like Ethereum, have talked about a world computer, and Bitcoiners, I think, are frequently just as confused. They talk about like digital gold, right? Use all of these metaphors. But actually, there's just one really basic thing which Bitcoin invented, which is digital property rights. And that's really important to understand, because up until now, for the last 5,000 years of human history, the only way that you could protect your property was through violence, right? Either you had to have like a gun or a club, or you had to rely on the police or a government, and you kind of pay them protection money. And so all law has relied on borders and violence. But we're living in a digital age now. Borders don't make sense, and violence can't be applied at a distance. So what we need for a global digital world is a global digital type of law. And that's what basically Bitcoin invented. The implications of changing our entire property rights, legal structure are very, very narrow, right? I mean, we're not building, world computers here. We're building institutions. And so I think that's the lens that you have to look at the entire crypto space as. Even as an investor, you have to invest saying, what are the institutions that are going to last and stand the test of time? And that's really why Bitcoin is so different from other things, and why I think DeFi built on Bitcoin is different, because it's designed to stand the test of time as an institution. So, yeah.
Well, I was just going to, and so the SOV token is a governance token, and what you're saying is it allows the community then to set those guidelines instead of one centralized entity.
Right, but it's very careful about how it does it, right? So it's not just one token, one vote. And the reason is, if you have one token, one vote, you expose the system to malicious manipulation. So for example, I could go and borrow a whole bunch of tokens, vote on something, vote on giving me a whole bunch of money, return the tokens, didn't cost me anything, right? I can manipulate the system. The other thing that you have to pay attention to is the incentives, right? So for example, uni token, right? People can vote all day long, but they don't get anything for voting. And so participation is quite low. The incentives to participate or to think carefully about how you're going to do it are quite low. With SOV token, the way the system is designed is you kind of have to mine the right to vote. What does that mean? You have to lock up the SOV token to be able to vote. You give up liquidity. But the longer you lock it up for, the more voting power you get. Now, this does two things. First of all, it means that even small token holders can have more power by locking their tokens up for longer. Second, it forces everyone to have a very, very long-term view, right? So it forces long-term thinking for the entire system. And three, it protects the system from short-term attacks. And then the incentive system is also aligned around long-term thinking, because the longer you're locking your token up for, the more revenue you earn from the system. So it's sort of a way of, instead of becoming a landlord, right, where you don't have to, you just got a bunch of tokens and you can vote with them and you can decide things. It's kind of like Bitcoin mining. You actually have to constantly work, constantly spend in order to participate in the governance. So you become a service provider instead of sort of like a land baron.
Interesting.
Very interesting. I like that. That.
What is the biggest challenge in the short term for Sovryn? Is it onboarding users, or what would you say is the biggest challenge?
Yeah, so I think right now Sovryn is, it's a new protocol. It's got a lot of kinks to work out, and so it's not the easiest thing to use. It's sometimes got, especially on the UI, it's not always the easiest thing to understand. And so I think it's going to be a little bit of time before it really becomes easy to onboard everyone. But the rate at which it's improving is remarkable. I don't think I've ever seen anything, certainly not in the decentralized space, improve at this rate, right? So I remember using it a few months ago, like 5 months ago, it was basically unusable. And now you can go check it out for yourself. It's like, it's starting to feel like a centralized service. So that's definitely like the biggest challenge. That said, usage is constantly growing. It turns out that it's a really, really sticky protocol. So we can see that addresses that interact with it tend to continue interacting with it at very, very high rates. And there's growing traction around it, and the developer community that's growing around it is growing at an astounding rate too. I think I've only seen this level of excitement in the crypto space twice before. So once was the very, very earliest days of Bitcoin, when also was excruciating to try and use Bitcoin, but it was kind of the best time to get in. And then also the very, very early days of Ethereum, when I remember, Vitalik was going from town to town in these meetups, and just the level of excitement in the rooms was crazy for something that hadn't even launched. And so I'm extremely optimistic about Sovryn, because I've seen this happen twice before. Just the level of energy, it's crazy.
And let me ask you this: what does success look like for Sovryn then in 5 years? the bull case? What does that look like?
Well, I think the first thing that Sovryn's going to probably be doing is bringing that $1 trillion of assets, which in 5 years I think is going to be like $10 trillion of Bitcoin assets. We've been seeing the amount of Bitcoin as a percentage on centralized exchanges dropping now for over a year and a half. We've seen Celsius sort of get attacked by the SEC, Coinbase get attacked by the SEC, all of the big lending platforms are being forced to shut down. And, Bybit have pulled out of South Korea. I think what's going to happen is people are going to realize that they can't use decentralized services with reliability. And we're already starting to see that migration. So we've got a lot of people who are using Sovryn who tell us, yeah, I was using BitMEX, right? And they got indicted, and I don't want to have my funds there anymore, right? So I think that's going to be step one. At the same time, there's sort of like a current building out these tools, which we really haven't seen DeFi tackle before. So there's a project which I think maybe even within the coming year is going to start offering like long-term pensions for people in Central America who can't rely on their government. So they can't invest in a pension, but now because it's controlled by a smart contract, they can. I think very soon we're likely to start seeing things happening in El Salvador. I think, we're starting to see, there's a team from Nigeria who are working on fiat off-ramps for Africa, for remittance. So I think there's going to be a lot of like real world use cases that are also going to be happening. And it's kind of going to be the same thing as what we saw with Bitcoin's growth, right? So it's like a lot of like the Bitcoin industry growing. And at the same time, remittance and other types of sort of use cases that are just real world use cases growing in parallel.
Very cool.
It's very exciting. Again, I encourage everybody to follow up with Sovryn. Check the links in the description below. Follow Yago on Twitter. We'll leave the links to all that stuff. I think, you answered a lot of my questions. We just have probably a few more big picture type questions that I think a lot of people in our audience are curious about. The first one, you kind of mentioned this, the US SEC seems to be circling cryptocurrency. The sharks are circling.
Yeah.
Is regulation good for crypto? Do you think regulatory clarity would bring massive amounts of institutional money into crypto? Or what do you think about regulations in general?
Sometimes people say that countries will ban Bitcoin. I think what's really going to happen is that Bitcoin is going to ban countries. So I think that the current state in it, the way it is now, is basically a relic of the industrial age, right? And we feel it all the time, right? Like what's happening with COVID now, right? What happened in 2008, the lack of trust that everyone has in their government, the polarization, the fact that left and right-wing politics just sound so irrelevant to our lives, right? On every single level, they're failing, right? Our institutions are failing. Can't deal with COVID, can't deal with global warming, can't deal with financial crises. Like what's going on? And what's going on is that our institutions are just simply not designed for a digital globalized world. And that's what we live in right now. So I think it's inevitable that that entire system is going to be replaced or at least augmented by the new institutions that we're building in the crypto space. Institutions like Bitcoin, like Sovryn, and additional things that are being worked on. And I think that we don't need to be scared about regulation because the harder they squeeze, the faster this is going to happen. And the reason is, like, let's say, they put out, central bank digital currencies, right? CBDCs, right? And people are going to have this immediate thing where they'll be able to say, oh, wow, like this is surveillance money and this is free money, right? Right now they've got cash. Imagine they get rid of cash, right? Everyone's going to need crypto. And then if they try to get crypto, it's only going to make people realize more that they need the crypto. Institutions are all global right now. If the US says you can't invest in, US corporations, we know, like how much corporate tax do they pay? 0, right? We all know that US corporations pay 0 tax because they just offshore. If the regulations say that US corporations can't hold Bitcoin. They'll just offshore. The world doesn't work with borders anymore. Every major significant player, right? The corporates, the NGOs, and ourselves, just like now, we can work remotely from wherever, live in a post-border world. So the harder they squeeze, the faster it's going to accelerate the process. And, this process is, it sounds like such a big thing, like such a mad idea that we're going to replace big parts of our institutions, right? But think about it this way. It took 12 years, only 12 years for us to go from zero to nation state with Bitcoin. Think about what the next 12 years are going to bring, because the whole thing is accelerating.
And as this, I totally agree with you that it's going to, one, it's inevitable, especially if you're in the US, the harder they squeeze, the faster this will get done. But as they're augmenting this regulation or it's changing, if you had like one message for Gary Gensler, as somebody who's been in the space for a while, what would you tell him?
I think I have a very simple message for them, which is this. For the last 20 years, we've had the internet. Everyone thought that the internet was going to create phenomenal productivity growth. It was going to increase this rate at which the economy grew, because every single corporation, every single person was now connected to each other. They had digital access and access to information. And what did we see? For the last 20 years, we've seen stagnation. This is really weird. Why did this happen? And I think there's a really simple reason. The reason is that we had 21st century technology, the internet, but it was married to Iron Age institutions. There is no private property on the internet. You are a serf in a feudal system, right? Your emperor is Mark Zuckerberg or, Jeff Bezos. They control you. The person who owns the servers owns everything. You don't have private property. Now, private property, and any US citizen, right, knows this. Private property is the source of prosperity. It's what incentivizes people to work. It's what creates innovation. It's what drives people and corporations to grow. And it does that by giving people the assurance that what they create, they'll get to keep, right? So we had this 21st century amazing technology, the internet, but we tied it to the economic policy of the Soviet Union. And so instead of taking us forwards, it took us backwards. Now we have digital property rights on the internet, right? So we now have this 21st century technology, which has an infinite frontier, right? And we have the property rights to go with it. We've already seen what that does. In just 10 years, we created a $2 trillion industry out of nothing. We are entering into the greatest period of wealth creation that human beings have ever seen. The people who are watching, Altcoin Daily are getting a once in 1,000 lifetimes opportunity to invest in a point in time when you have an infinite frontier and a new type of protecting property. These things don't happen ever, right? So we're going to see hundreds of trillions of dollars worth of wealth created over the next 10, 15 years, right? There's never been an opportunity like this. So all I would say to Gary is, do you want to be part of this or not?
It's inevitable. I love that. And I totally agree at that long-term perspective. This train is rolling, it's happening. Just a fun question now that we like to ask all our guests. But for the end of this year, 2021, what's your Bitcoin price prediction?
I mean, I don't typically look at the price. I bought my first Bitcoins at, when they were trading at $3.50, right? I still haven't sold any. And that's because I see this as, generational wealth, right? And that's why I have some ETH and I have some of the other things and I use them to experiment and to play, but it's not a way that I can save my money, right? It's not something that I know that my kids or my grandkids will be able to inherit. So I don't really care, but whatever it is now, 10x it.
By the end of this year?
I mean, by the end of this year, I wouldn't be surprised to see it at $250,000 by the end of the year.
Damn.
I love it. So you're telling me that, you've been in Bitcoin a long time and you've never sold any significant amount?
I've never sold, I've maybe sold a few $100s worth of Bitcoin.
Damn. I love that.
Will you
I'm never going to have to sell. Like you go to Sovryn, I'm now going to be able to borrow against my Bitcoin at 0% interest. Like,
true.
You never have to sell Bitcoin. That's like, that is the asset. You know, every generation has to make one good decision. Your grandparents had to decide to go to college. They did that. They could fuck up everything else. That'd be fine. Your parents had to decide to buy a house. Didn't matter how much they were underwater on the mortgage. If they bought a house in the 80s, they're millionaires today. Our generation has an even bigger opportunity. Just buy Bitcoin, right? Doesn't matter what you do. You're going to end up with fuck you money.
I love that. And that brings me to my final question. If you're a new investor coming into this space today, what's a piece of advice you would give that new investor?
Be an investor, not a speculator, right? So speculation is fun and it's cool, but you have to remember it's a casino, right? So you only put casino money in, right? Bitcoin is your savings account. 80% or more should be in Bitcoin. The amount that you allocate to speculating on other things, that's casino money. When you get into this, like, most of the people come in bull markets. There's a lot of excitement and everyone has fantasies of getting rich, right? There are very few ways to get poor quicker than trying to get rich quick, right? The people that I know and have met along this journey that I've been on for the last 10 years who have really made it are the people who have taken a long-term view and have acted in the most boring way possible. And not just with Bitcoin, but with the other assets as well. You know, people who have taken a long-term view on Ethereum. So don't be a speculator, be an investor.
Interesting. I love that. And not to put you on the spot, but also just maybe to go a step further. Let's say you were talking with your buddy at the bar who's a more experienced investor, someone closer to somebody who's been in the space for a long time. What's a piece of advice you may give him?
Someone who's been in the crypto space, you mean?
Yeah,
like
exactly.
like a more experienced investor now, because that was really good advice, I think, for a new person in cryptocurrency, but like for a more experienced person.
Yeah. So what I would do for that person is I would go back to what I said earlier. Don't think of this as technology. Think about this as building institutions, right? The paradigm has changed. We're not building the internet anymore. We're building what comes after the internet, right? We're building the property rights for an internet age. So when you're looking at opportunities to invest in space, there are hidden gems, right? Those are the things that are building fundamentally new institutions that are going to be valuable and reliable into the future.
I love that. Iago, thank you so much for joining us today. I feel I have such a better understanding of Sovryn and all the infrastructure that's being built. Would you just give final thoughts for the Altcoin Daily audience and final thoughts about Sovryn?
Yeah, so I would say this. The great thing about Bitcoin, the genius, or one of the many genius things that Satoshi did, right, is that it's a debt-free scheme dressed up as a get-rich-quick scheme, right? So get rich. But the real thing here, the real valuable thing is to become sovereign, is to become the master of your own destiny, to be able to help yourself, your family, and the people close to you achieve what they want to achieve. So at the end of the day, I think the real opportunity here is to stay sovereign.
Hell yeah. Everybody needs to check out Sovryn, check out the user interface, try it out for yourself. If you want to, do that. I think it's an awesome product. Follow Iago on Twitter. And we'll be keeping our audience updated on Sovryn for sure. Thanks for coming on today, Iago.
Thanks for having me. It's been awesome.